I've been thinking about how to start this one, and I keep coming back to something that I think is true, but it doesn't get said enough about this kind of call, right? When you're the person on the ground, when it's your job to stand there and talk. The thing I think the thing nobody talks about tells you is how quiet it gets.
Mhm.
Like not literally quiet, but there's noise. There's usually a lot of noise. People, radios going off. There's the weather, wind, but in internally, it gets very quiet because everything narrows down to the conversation, right?
Mhm.
Just the conversation. Nothing
Mhm.
else exists.
Yeah, that's a remarkable way to put it, actually, yeah.
It's the only way I can think to describe it.
Mhm.
You're not thinking about procedure. You're not actually you're not running a checklist. You're just present. Completely present
Mhm.
with another person who is at the worst point in their life, and everything that you say matters.
Mhm.
And some things you could say would make it worse, and you
Mhm.
don't always know which is which in that moment. That is episode 6.
Let's talk about it. Welcome back to John Teaches Sean About His Brain. I'm John.
And I'm Sean. This is episode 6. And I want to say at the top, just from the beginning, this is a different kind of episode. But I feel like I say that every episode. But I mean, we've had some funny ones, we've had some heavy ones, we've had some intellectual ones. And I feel like this is all three at different moments, but it starts and ends in a very serious place. And I think that's right for this subject matter.
Yeah, it is, and I wanna say something for anyone that's listening who might be carrying something right now heavy on them. This episode deals honestly with suicide and crisis. So we're gonna treat it with the seriousness it deserves, and if anything in this episode connects with something that you're going through personally, I just want you to know that there is help available. In the US, you can call or text 988. That's the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. You can text or call that anytime, 24/7, and somebody will be there when you do.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. The call. Okay. Let's just, for
Okay.
context, I feel like in my experience, crisis calls involving someone threatening to harm themselves can be, again, in my experience, are usually some of the most resource intensive calls that an officer goes on. So you think they involve multiple units. So a lot of officers there, uh, negotiators, EMS on standby, and sometimes an extended amount of time. This call in particular ran long,
Mhm.
longer than most things that I've been involved with.
Like, how long, basically?
Long enough that I had time to think,
Mm,
and which can be useful and also not useful, depending on what your brain decides to do with that time. So let me tell you about it. So
please.
the call comes in. I get dispatched to this call, and simply put, it's a person threatening to jump from an elevator. It's from a height, right? I'm I want to keep the location and the details general. But I think that I can say this structure, right? I said
Mhm.
elevated, but I don't think I'm violating privacy if I describe it a little bit, because I think it's important to
Mhm.
kind of visualize what we're dealing with. But it's a parking structure,
Mm.
and so it's 4 stories high, and in the very back of that parking structure, it actually faces a street. It's like the parking structure, sidewalk, and then it's the street.
Mhm.
And at
Wow.
the top of the parking structure, it's open air, so there's nothing over the top of that fourth level. And then there's just it's like it's a half wall that's as high as
Okay.
that wall all
Mhm.
around the top of that structure goes.
That's like most parking garages, I think. Yeah.
I think it's pretty standard, right?
Yeah.
Except for, and maybe not even except for, it's just what I think about and what I thought was important is the proximity to the street.
Yeah. Yeah, that might be different. Mhm.
And so where this person is standing, and then that's I didn't say that part. We arrive and we find a person standing on that half wall. Yeah. And, we pull up and we're visible, police cars, uniforms. Uh, this person is aware of us as soon as we arrive.
Mhm.
And they're not moving. They're not going to come down either. That's the thing that we've established immediately.
Yeah, that just hearing this, I'm not afraid of heights, like, I don't avoid escalators and things like that, but heights still scare me. So this is like, seeing somebody just standing on a half wall, that's yeah, that kind of tightens my stomach a little bit. So what's the first thing that you do when you get there?
Okay. So first thing is we have to establish a perimeter. We
Mhm.
there's a crowd that is gathered on the sidewalk and a little bit in the street. We got to worry about now people's safety. There are people who are standing in the street, and there is
Yeah,
traffic still. So
yeah.
so when we say establish a perimeter, the we're concerned about the person who's standing on that wall, but we're also worried about the crowd
Yeah.
and and not only their safety, but and not because people are I'm not saying they're malicious in this, but crowds can be unpredictable.
Mhm.
And because the person up there can see everybody down below, what a crowd sometimes communicates to someone in crisis is not always what we want communicated. So
Yeah.
so we push the people back a little bit. We're trying to create some space. And then we talked about this on previous episodes. We got to figure out who the contact officer is.
So, was that you?
In this case, yes.
Wow.
But we when I was talking about resources, one of the first things that we do is update dispatch with what we're seeing, and they do it the way that we call it is they called out a negotiator. So there's a police officer, usually a police officer, but who has been trained in the tactics of negotiations. They're trained for this situation, right? So
Mhm.
they're on the way, but they were not on the scene yet. And this situation was live, evolving, and waiting. I mean, think about the two, or more than two, but me and my partner, and then we had several officers, kind of, trying to establish that perimeter. And then also, the other side of this is why I brought up the parking structure part of it is that think about there are cars that are still moving through that parking structure
Yeah, behind the person. Yeah.
behind the person. So we had to send an officer. At that time, we only had one to spare, but we had to send an officer up to the third floor. And we're now trying to kind of control traffic and not letting anybody go up there either.
Yeah, because you don't know what they're gonna do. I mean, somebody could see that person, stop their car and jump out and say, "Hey, hey," and go running towards them or
Yes.
something. I mean, you don't know what people are gonna do.
The crowd, people are just unpredictable in this
Yeah,
situation. And
yeah.
and so that I'm just trying to kind of set the stage for how many officers we actually need to try to lock this location down
Mhm,
before we can even start connecting with them and trying to figure, any of that. We got to try to figure out, think about all of these things. So we have a
mhm,
negotiator on the way, and
mhm.
so I step up and I start the conversation.
Wow. That, yeah, I'm getting the picture. That's nerve-wracking. So, I mean, if you're the one stepping up, like, to say something, like, how do you start that conversation? What do you say?
For me, it's my name.
Mhm,
Always. And so first thing is the name, and it's not only in this particular situation, but I tried real hard when I give my name to anybody, but especially in this situation, it's not Officer Hendrickson. It's not
mhm.
li- it's not my rank. It's not a command, not a question. It is my name is Sean. I am here. I'm not going anywhere, and all I want to do is talk. Because the first thing I'm trying to do is establish that there is a specific human being on the ground who is paying attention to this specific human being up there, right? Not a uniform, not a procedure, but there's a person here.
Man, that is really, really important. You're establish your presence before you do anything else. That's good. And that you're
Yeah.
paying attention to them.
Presence before anything else. And then I'm paying attention to you. So the best way, I think sometimes, or maybe in this case, I don't really remember, but I might have said, I'm here to listen or whatever. But I think the most powerful thing you can do is actually do the thing, right? So you listen,
Mhm.
you
Yeah.
ask, you ask them a question and you listen. It's not to, gather information or not only to gather information, I guess, right? But to show I'm genuinely paying attention to what you say. So sometimes, and this isn't bashing on other officers or any human beings. It's just think about the setting that we're in, and it's nerve wracking, and your brain's going just a million miles a second. And
Yeah.
so when you ask a question and they answer it, and you follow it up, just ask another question. You know what I'm trying to get to?
Yeah.
Like
Yep. Yep.
it's this thoughtful. Like I ask a question, they answer that question, and I kind of process that question. I let it sit. And then the other thing I tried to do is ask a question based on their answer. So
To
it's
create the
hard to do.
conversation rather
Yeah.
than they're just trying to tell me something. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. And one of the things that I think brings a person to the point where they're standing on a parking garage and the feeling that no one isn't listening to them, that no one sees them.
Yep.
So the first job is to be the person who is visibly, demonstrably seeing them and listening to them.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when you did that, like, how did this person respond to you talking and listening, and what was the response like?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it was slow at first, right? And there were short answers, kind of clipped short answers. Uh, checking, I got the sense they were checking if this was real or if I was running a script. Like I have a checklist in
Mhm.
my head, and I'm just
Mhm.
going to ask the questions, and I think that's fair. I don't
Yeah.
know what their experience in life was, but maybe they've heard the script before, and so I was just at that time I was just trying to stay patient. I didn't push. I let the silences be silences instead of trying to fill them with noise. And eventually, and it took a little bit, but the short answers got a little bit longer.
That's
And
good.
yeah, and here's the other thing about crisis conversations that I will admit to you that going in, I did not fully understand, and I I think that most people don't understand is my job as I saw it in that moment was not to talk them out of it. I want to say that
Mm.
just clearly, right? Because I
Mhm.
think that's the most important thing is my job is not to construct some argument that convinces them to step down off that wall and to get help. It's not to list all the reasons why they should come down off that wall.
That's good.
It's not to tell them things are going to get better, or people love them and care about them and this is not worth it. Those I feel like those are well-meaning, and I think I would maybe you could argue this, but instinctively human things. But I also believe that making those arguments can actually make this worse.
Yeah, those are instinctively human things to say
Oh,
and
good.
do, and you're right. That can make things worse, and we're gonna get into that in detail. I wanna get into that in detail a little bit, but keep going. I want you to tell your story first.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. 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 So I'm not okay. So at this point, I'm not mounting an argument. I'm not trying to persuade anybody. I want to be just go back to what I said. I am asking questions and listening. And then what comes out, so over time, and this went on for, again, quite a while, not all at once, but then I get a person who has been carrying something enormous for a long time
Mhm.
and has reached a conclusion that there is no path forward. Not because they're irrational, it's because from where they're standing, that conclusion feels completely true.
Yeah, their perception and their cognitive flexibility, everything is being constricted. It's all narrowing down to where it looks like there's one option. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You introduced me to this term, the narrowed aperture. I love that
Yeah.
term. I love the term, not what we're talking about, but, so again, I didn't have that language at this time, but that is it. They could not see the other door. Another one I stole
Mhm.
from you.
Mhm.
So they couldn't see the other door, and every time I gently tried to point at the other door, have you talked to anyone about this? There are resources, things can change. I slip into that language every once in a while with them, and I could feel the conversation just close a little bit. Like
Yeah.
I was speaking a language that just didn't connect with them.
Yeah. You're offering solutions, like rational solutions to somebody who has already concluded that there are no solutions. Those don't exist.
Exactly right. So at some point, thankfully, I stopped offering solutions. So
Mhm.
I just asked about them. That's what who they were, the things they cared about, the things they liked to do, any of that. What the thing was that had brought them here. Not because I wasn't trying to come across like I needed to understand the logic of this decision, but because
Mhm.
I feel like I wanted them to know that I was interested in them as a person,
Mhm.
that they were worth being curious about.
Just a quick question here. Was this the first time you'd ever been in this situation where you're negotiating with the person, or this was your first time? So
Like
you're kind
this,
of
yeah.
you
Yeah.
'cause you were saying, "I could tell when I'd offer them a solution that wasn't going well, so I stopped offering solutions." So this is like you're learning on the job. You're learning on the fly
On the
as you go
fly.
through this. And so you're
Yeah.
feeling this shift that that's happening with this person, which is huge. So what happened at that point? When you understood that shift, what happened?
I
What
the
Yeah.
conversation changed. And
Mhm.
if I may, my experience, my, quote unquote training for this situation was from movies and TV. The only thing I was
Okay.
missing was the blow or the bullhorn, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
have one of those. It was just me
A little
shouting 4
tent
stories up.
on poles, just a
Yeah,
tent roof
yeah.
where you have you're talking and you got a bullhorn, you got a group behind you feeding you
That
yeah.
it was real close to that, but my point to that was, and I'm not blaming the media on the mistakes I made in the beginning of this interaction, but I did find myself going to the things, that I remembered hearing or seeing on a movie or a TV show
Mhm,
when there
mhm,
was someone anyway, so the conversation, when I stopped trying to replicate what I saw in a movie, and started just listening to the person and asking the right questions, it slowed down. The
mhm,
conversation got slower, and it felt more like a conversation between 2 human beings. There were things said that I'm not gonna repeat because they belong to that person and that
mhm,
moment,
mhm.
but I can just tell you the quality of the exchange between us changed. And so for me, it stopped feeling like a negotiation and started feeling like 2 people who were just talking.
Wow.
And then somewhere in that, I don't know when, the decision that had felt absolutely fixed, I could feel it start to give just a little bit. I could feel it. It's not something that was said. I couldn't see it, and I can't explain it better than that, but I could feel it.
Do do you know about how long the conversation had been going on at that
Oof.
point when you started to feel it?
Um, I'll tell you it was a long time. I'll
It's
tell
hard
you
to
know what?
judge, I know, yeah.
It is, because yeah, but I'll tell you this, the negotiator had arrived. The
Oh,
neg the negotiator was on scene, and they were nearby. I knew they were there, but we made the call. It's not like we huddled up and said, "What are we going to do?" But I think just in that moment, the negotiator saw what was happening. They talked to my partner. My partner kind of went over, and the negotiator. I don't know what that conversation was,
mhm.
but my partner came back over and didn't say anything to me, which to me was a signal.
Keep going.
Keep going.
Yeah.
if my partner would have came over and I don't know what they would have said, they come over and go, hey, let's transition, let's hand it
Mhm,
off,
mhm.
whatever the language is. But them not saying anything said everything. We're not changing anything.
I'm
So,
really glad to hear that if I could, just because
oh,
th the sometimes, a good negotiator knows that the goal is to come to have a reasonable solution to the situation, not to inject themselves into it. But sometimes negotiators, I think, feel, I don't know if it's ego or what, but feel like they need to be the ones that are doing the talking because I'm the one that has the training.
right.
To hear about a negotiator showing up and listening and going, yeah, this is going the way that it's heading in the right direction. So I don't want to mess this up. I think that is really, really good that the negotiator judged that kind of on the fly too. So it
Yeah.
shows you were doing a really good job, but that the negotiator also didn't let their ego kind of step in the middle. That the goal for everybody was to get the person down safely.
Yeah. I mean, well, now that you say that, there's a couple of things that in telling the story maybe never so number one, kudos to that negotiator. I always thought
Mhm,
that
mhm.
after the call I reflected on that and went, wow, but I didn't think about it to the depth you just brought it up. Think about, you've been trained in this specific thing, you've been called out, so you had to leave your house. They were not on duty at the time. They
Mhm,
had to, whatever they were doing, they got to get into a car and they drive here to do their thing. And from a very
mhm.
human standpoint, and with enough ego, it'd be very easy to go, "Hey, doesn't matter. I'm here. I'm taking over. I'm doing this thing." They didn't do that, and again,
Yeah,
so that was really
I'm
cool.
friends with a hostage negotiator that's
Oh,
trains with the FBI and also with police and different and Doug would have pulled up and listened and let you keep going. And we've
yeah,
had discussions about that before and about, uh, I think that I think this is what Doug said. This is my impression. I think it came from Doug that a lot of times when you're training, hostage negotiators go through so much training and they realize as they're going through it that they now know so much more than they did before that it builds kind of this sense of fear of if you don't know everything I know, you're going to screw something up. And he says that he tries to, that's one of the things he tries to train is if you arrive and somebody's already talking, as long as they're heading things in the right way, don't worry about them screwing something up. Let them talk. And if they start to mess up and you see things going the opposite way, that's when you step in because otherwise just if that person has built a rapport with the person they're talking to and you break that you're just almost like starting over at zero, except probably not even starting at zero, you're starting in the hole now because you've
yeah,
got to bring them back to zero because they're not understanding why I like that person, I was connecting with them, why are you taking them away from me? And
yeah,
so having a negotiator that understands that is really important. That was really good to hear.
yeah, yeah. Well, so listen, it worked. I mean, they came down.
Oh,
They
good, good,
And
good.
so let me not jump ahead. The first thing I asked them to do was sit on the wall, not stand on the wall.
Okay.
And that wasn't a command. I did make it like, "Hey, could you do I didn't say, 'Could you do me a favor?' I don't remember how I said it, but I just remember they were like, "Okay, I'll do that. I'm not coming
Mhm,
down, but I'll
mhm.
sit down." And, so then they sat down. So then, we keep going, we keep talking, and then they agreed to get off that wall and then walk to the officer that was gonna come up the ramp. Like, so here,
That's good to
I
hear,
don't
yeah.
yeah, I don't wanna, try to go too far into, like, police procedure or whatever. Just me as a human being, what my fear was that an officer trying to do the right thing was gonna come up the ramp to the 4th floor and startle them. Like, there's a cop
Yeah,
coming or
yeah,
whatever,
mhm.
and so again, you wanna have an officer up there who can kind of see, what's going on, and but that was my fear. So anyway,
Mhm.
part of the negotiation, so to speak, was, will you sit down? Okay, they sat down, we talked more. It was still a little while, and then it said, when they agreed to come down, I just said, if you would swing your legs to the other side and stand up and walk, an officer is just going to come and make sure you get to the ambulance. And they're like, okay. So they came down. I want to make sure I say that clearly. because I think it matters how you hear the rest of this episode. This is not like episode 2. If you heard it, this person came down, they met the officer, and right behind the officer were paramedics, EMS, and they took over. EMS took care of this person. The outcome was good. It was okay.
Good, good. I like that.
So then, I'm being honest about all of this and what happened after, because, okay, so they get handed off. I have to do some paperwork, because I don't want to sound super cynical, but we just ate up a whole bunch of time and resources.
Yeah,
And so, we got
you
to
gotta
do the
account for
paperwork.
it.
We got to account for all that time and people and all that. But then, eventually, I do the report, I do all that, I get back into the car. And as soon as I get in the patrol car, there's this, I don't know what to call it. Deflation isn't right. Release isn't right. It's like
Mm,
the thing that was holding me together at full tension was just slowly kind of letting go. And
mm,
I didn't even realize it was there, but I didn't realize how tight it was until it started releasing.
So you had like this tightness that you weren't aware of until it started to release. That was probably adrenaline metabolizing. You're probably coming down off of that, just a rush of adrenaline because of the situation. I mean, that is harrowing situation.
Yeah. And I mean, that's not what this episode's about, but I was just sitting here reflecting on it. And, we've talked about on channel and back channel,
Mhm.
but my back channel kept not picturing, I don't want to say it like I was seeing him jump. I was trying to go, if this happens, what am I going to do? And, and so I was trying to plan for the worst,
The what
but I
if
got that,
scenarios, yeah.
yeah, the what ifs of how to do all. So it, that I feel like that provided something else when I was sitting in the car. It was like,
Mhm,
it was weight. There was
mhm,
weight.
mhm.
Uh, and then, because you carry that conversation home,
Yeah.
I mean, not the procedure, right? Like not the paperwork, the conversation. I'm going back over all the things that this person said, and
Mhm,
and it, and I sit there with the knowledge that, oh, outcome was good this time. That gr- and
mhm.
and they but good this time doesn't mean anything about the next time.
Yeah, and thank goodness it turned out good this time. That's still you're still carrying all of that, but then if it wouldn't have turned out so well, that would have been even extra weight to carry because then you would have been playing through your mind what they said, and maybe if I would have said this, it would have turned out
That's
differently, and you've got so many things that you are going through that probably don't have anything to do with it, but all of the human side of it is to feel responsible for that, and those are the really heavy things that first responders, police officers, EMS, fire, that those are the heavy things that you all have to deal with regularly in your profession.
yeah, yeah. It connects to something. We got to the question I want to ask you, which is, what do we actually know about why that conversation worked? Because it felt like right in the moment, it felt right to me, but I couldn't tell you why. And I mean, I was running on experience, probably some instinct, mostly training, and whatever combination of those three things produces the ability to stay present with someone who's in that state.
Mhm.
And I just want to understand what those three things were doing.
Yeah. So before I say anything about this, a disclaimer. I always like to add disclaimers up front, but
Okay.
I want to be clear that I am, and that's because, especially in this episode, because I think it matters so much, but I am not a clinical psychologist. So I'm experimental psychology. I study the brain and how the brain works. I have never been trained as a crisis negotiator or as a person on a crisis hotline that takes calls. I've never had personal experience with what you're talking about. Um, I've uh, I've never dealt with somebody in that situation where you're it's in the moment and you're trying to do something. So I'm not going to try to tell people in that position, like to tell you or other officers if you're in that position what you need to do because I'm not qualified to do that. I think that
That's
my
fair.
advice would be if you're in that situation, we'll talk about some things you can do if you don't have any other choice. But the best option is to try to get help as soon as you can from professionals because just like what we were talking about there at the last, where if there is a bad outcome, you have to sit with that outcome and you have to, it'll be with you for the rest of your life and thinking about, did I say something or do something wrong? Without the training, you could really end up beating yourself up with that. So that all of that weight can be shifted onto a professional because they have been trained to do that. So that would be my first advice would be to talk about, that part of it, that just be sure you're finding a professional. But beyond that, I I would like to talk about some things, maybe talk more about like what's happening in the brain during these types of
That
situations.
would be great. That'd be
So,
helpful.
okay, so
Yeah.
let's start with kind of what a crisis is, like what's happening in the brain during a crisis. There's a researcher by the name of Schneidman, I believe is his name, that has done a ton of research, over 40 years of research with suicides and those types of situations that people are in. Um, and he has read numerous like suicide notes, things like that. One of the things, and his theory and his idea of how to deal with it is he came out with this idea that people that are intent on ending their life through suicide do not it's not because they have a wish to die, which is it sounds shocking. It's like, well, that's the whole point. It's like, no, they're not doing this because they want to die. It's for other reasons. And those other reasons, he came up with the term psych ache instead of headache. It's like aching
Psych ache.
psychologically, psych ache. And he said that's when pain, emotional pain, mental pain becomes too much to bear. It's like an unbearable pain that you have. And
Hmm.
you couple that with what I mentioned earlier, constriction, narrowing the aperture. You're only seeing one door. All these options, all these doors of options are closing down. Everything's getting constricted down to where it looks like I have one option. And that option, a lot of times, because of the pain and those types of things, that option is to end your life. But you're not ending your life because you have this wish to die in the sense that for death's sake. Does that make sense? I don't even know if
I
I
mean,
know what it means in my head. I want to make sure it's making sense to you as I say it.
yeah, the explanation you're giving, it makes sense, but I'm still butting up against this. What you're saying makes sense. It's me, not you, in that when I hear you say that someone intent on committing suicide, it isn't because they want to die.
Yeah.
And
So,
I'm oversimplifying it just to say it's causing a little itch in my brain. But what
yeah.
you're saying is it makes sense. Don't think about it. Maybe it's helpful to think about it's the psychological pain has become too much to bear, and that narrows the aperture.
Yes, yes. So let me explain it a little bit. Let me try to do a little
Okay.
bit better job.
Yeah.
So unbearable psychological pain it would be things like shame, guilt, loneliness, despair. So the theme is I can't stand this pain any longer. Like this is too much pain. I can't bear it anymore. I can't stand this pain any longer. So suicide isn't just about
Hmm.
wanting death, it's about needing to stop the pain, and this is the only way I can permanently stop the pain. If that makes it a little bit
That
more clear
that
there.
makes sense.
It's not like I wanna die, it's like, I've gotta
How
stop
do I
this pain.
stop
For
the
whatever
pain?
it takes, I've just gotta stop this pain.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then when you're narrowing the
Hmm.
perceptual and cognitive fields, they get narrowed until that person just can't see alternatives anymore. So they miss things that would have been obvious to them on any other day, but today they can't see that because everything's been narrowed down so much. And this lines up really well with what's called prefrontal limbic dysregulation. So we'll break that down a little bit.
Okay. Thank you.
and there's neuroimaging studies that show this, but cognitive flexibility, being able to, like, if you're trying something that doesn't work, to be able to quickly look at it from a different angle, so that kind of being flexible with that,
Mm,
problem solving, those types of things happen in the prefrontal cortex, so right behind the forehead, and those become limited. So the kind of the we talked about the terms. Dorsolateral means the top outside. So of this prefrontal cortex, the top outside, like right in behind here, probably in that region, is the brain's cognitive control center, which is flexible thinking, perspective taking, imagining what a future may be like. Those are all tamped down. They aren't functioning properly in situations like this. And the prefrontal cortex, the dorsolateral, also prefrontal cortex, also regulates emotions. So the emotional brain, the limbic system, you've heard of that. It sits
mhm.
below and a little bit behind the prefrontal cortex, um, and that part of the brain becomes overactive. And so we're talking specifically about the amygdala, and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex sends signals down to tamp it down and calm it down if it's getting too active. But when in an acute situation where the pain is becoming really, really strong, a person's feeling like overwhelming distress, this top-down control function gets reduced. So again, what's happening functionally is there's a control, and your thinking and all those things start to narrow down. The aperture's closing down. It's constricting. Your cognitive flexibility degrades. You don't, you can't see any options on how you can get out of this. And so that's what kind of leads to this unbearable pain, because I don't see any way out. Everything's happening right now. I think one of the keys is in an acute situation, which means you can have general depression or general anxiety, but then there's a moment, something that triggers this one extra moment where it becomes, exceptionally depressing. And
Mm.
that's an acute episode, which is a lot of times what will trigger suicidal attempts.
So, like, the chronic depression is over time,
Hmm.
and if you and I'm not saying this is describing everybody, but I'm imagining, like, you're depressed for a period of time, and then you have this event, whatever it is, and it spikes
Hmm.
to a degree that it's causing what you're describing.
Yeah. In fact, the definition of depression, to be clinically depressed, it has to be that state of depression over several months.
Oh,
So if you've
okay.
been depressed for 3 weeks, then you're not clinically depressed at that point. You wouldn't be diagnosed as being clinically depressed.
Hmm.
So it's, but you're right, it's the spike in that. And not that everybody, again, as I'm giving examples, I just want to be sure that I'm not kind of shoehorning this in to think only people who have clinical depression attempt suicide, because that's not the case.
Yeah,
It
fair.
can be somebody who's never been they've had a breakup, a significant breakup, and then that pain, they sit with it for a few days, and it's more than they can bear. They might not have any problems before that. So,
Right.
yeah, it's just the acute nature of it. I was just trying to differentiate between an acute episode versus a chronic episode to show that they're different.
Yeah, and I think that was my fault. I'm trying to give people images and examples of things, but by doing that, I'm, being way too specific about this topic. So
No,
sorry for that. Sorry.
no. That's good. But I think the key to this is a person didn't reason themselves into this situation. Like they didn't think through it and think, okay, I have all of this pain. So now let's see, what are my options on how to get rid of it? You're not reasoning your way
Right.
into it. Like,
Right.
and I understand that if I do this, that my family will suffer, but they're not weighing options. It's just like they didn't use logic and reasoning to get there. They were kind of emotionally pushed into this corner. So you cannot give them, like, if you try to argue with them using reason and logic, you're not going to get anywhere, because you can't reason somebody out of a state that they didn't reason themselves into in the first place.
That's a
So
really good way of putting it. That
logic and logic and
I
reasoning won't help you normally with that.
yes. because you already said the prefrontal, limbics, all those systems are not, working as
operating as
they're
yeah,
yeah, yeah, and
they're not operating as they should.
that's what I would be talking to when I
Mhm.
need you to use logic and problem
Yep.
solve and all those things.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
So what you would have to do, and what you were doing at this point, is you're working with the part of the brain that is still online to a degree, and that's the part of the brain that responds to human connection, and that part of the brain stays available longer than any other part of the it's kind of like the last part to
Mm,
go because trying to connect with somebody. So, um, when you think about human connection, you're thinking about things you already mentioned, being seen, being heard, being treated as someone who's worthy of attention at that point, or you're worth being attended to. Um, I think I think it's called the interpersonal theory. But anyway, there's a theory that says that there are two perceptions that people have that not that they're not the only perceptions, but there's two predominant perceptions. They're always at kind of the center of the suicidal desire. And those two are based on what's called thwarted belongingness. So
thwarted?
I'm completely alone. I don't belong. And that's not true. It's thwarted because it's unrealistic because
Mm,
everybody belongs, but that gets twisted. And then you're thinking, yeah, I'm completely alone. I'm completely alone here. Nobody cares. I don't belong anywhere. I don't fit in anywhere. And then the other part of it is perceived burdensomeness, perceived burdensomeness, being a burden. You think you're a
they're a
burden to
burden.
people. So
Yeah, I'm a burden.
everyone would be better off without me. Like, so those two thoughts, I'm completely alone and everyone would be better off without me, are almost always at least two of the things that are at the center of this desire for suicide to end everything, to end the pain. So if you think about it in those terms, like what counter evidence can you give to those thoughts? Like what counter evidence can you give to I'm completely alone and everybody would be better off without me is staying there with them, listening to them, paying attention to them, being curious about them. Like you mentioned, you got curious about them as a person, stopped thinking about what should I say next and more about talking to them and finding out who they are. You said you were asking questions, not just to get together information, because you were curious about understanding them. Those are the things that let people know that kind of that those thoughts they're having aren't true. You were giving them counter evidence to the beliefs that was really driving that crisis,
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
good.
Didn't think of any of that in those words at that time, to be clear, but
Yeah.
thank you.
A lot of researchers and a lot of years of research to develop those ideas, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So, maybe we could talk a little bit about get more specific on what works and what doesn't, and this like, because there are some things that you think are gonna help people that backfire, and I
Mhm.
wanna talk about these, um, in terms beyond just thinking about them in relationship to somebody jumping off a ledge, like the situation you're talking about. These can apply to a friend that you have that seems to be in real despair. These are some things you should know, even if somebody's in despair. And I'm not talking about despair like where they're about ready to end their life. I'm talking about just deep despair anyway. These are kind of things that you should and shouldn't do to help with that. So I'll start kind of with what backfires and then we'll talk about some of the other ways to do it. But the first one is to try to rush in with solutions and reassurance. Like I'm going to solve this for you, and I'm going to reassure you. So things like, no, it's going to get better. Like you have
Mm,
so much to live for. Think of the people who love you. Everything's going to be okay. Those types of statements, I believe, nearly all the time, if not all the time, come from a caring place. You know, somebody who deeply cares about somebody else would say that, but the person that's in despair hears like the opposite. It's the opposite of comfort to them because the implicit message behind those things, like everything's going to be okay, that it's saying, what you're feeling right now is a big mistake. You just don't get it. There's an obvious answer. You're failing to see it. That's kind of the message that starts to come through. And when you're in the pain of despair, those types of statements really deepen the sense of being alone and misunderstood. Like I don't belong and I'm misunderstood. If you're believing that, if your back channel is believing that, and then you say something, somebody goes, "No, you're everything's going to be okay." It's like, yeah, see, nobody gets me, nobody understands me.
Yeah.
So it just is kind of a cycle. So it sharpens that feeling that nobody understands me and I'm just a burden to people. So the intention's good, but the words can come across as invalidating,
Yeah,
if that makes
it
sense.
comes from a place of wanting to help,
Yeah, yeah,
but that's not the way that I mean, when you're saying that halfway through your explanation, I was grinning because I was like, I know exactly where this is going
yeah.
because I can see, and then also wherever they are in this, that this is a question. It was going to sound like a statement. Can that further narrow the aperture? Me
Oh,
saying
yeah.
that?
Yeah, yeah. No, that definitely does,
Mm,
because that comes across as like a danger to their back channel, like we're in danger here because we don't belong and we're a burden to people. And now they're showing me that I'm even a bigger burden because I just don't get it. All this is in my mind and we got to get out of here. We got to end this now. It makes it worse. It spirals upward, the intensity of it.
yeah.
So, wanting to help is a really good thing, but it's irrelevant if the person doesn't perceive it as help. Like, then
Right.
what good is it at that point? So
Yeah.
what does work is validation, specifically the validation of the pain. So not to validate the conclusion that the person's coming to, but to validate the pain. So you wouldn't say, "You're right, there's no way out." You wouldn't validate that part, the
Thank
conclusion.
you for because when you said validation, I was like, wait, no, no.
No, no,
Uh,
you validate the pain they're having. So you would say something like, "It sounds like that you've been carrying, this pain, there's something enormous, this really big pain for a long time, and you're exhausted from it." It's like, "Yeah, that's what I've been trying to say. Yeah, like, you're understanding me now." And not so that's the part you're validating. So just if you just put somebody's feelings into words, like saying you're carrying something enormous and you're probably exhausted, those types of things, that's called affect labeling, the AFF, affect, somebody's emotional affect. That's affect labeling. And that not only validates the other person, but can also cause physiological changes in the brain. And there's been imaging studies to show this, which this is what I love about research because you can you can test these questions to see if those statements are validating or not. Um,
mm,
there's been studies where they're measuring brain activity with somebody that's in a mode of despair, and when they receive these affect labeling, where they name their feelings or somebody names their feelings for them, the activity levels in the amygdala drop and activity increases in the prefrontal lobes. And that's the
mm.
exact thing you want because when the prefrontal lobe activity drops and the amygdala and limbic increases, that's where you're spiraling into danger area. But if you can get the limbic and amygdala to decrease activity and the prefrontal lobe to increase, then that helps the person. So just naming the feeling in a sense helps the person hit the brakes on that feeling. And it's not an
Oh,
immediately screech to a stop, but it starts slowing things down a little bit.
we're feathering the brakes here a little bit on
Feathering the
this.
brakes, that's right.
And I'll tell you when you said the quote that you just said, I don't remember my exact words, and I didn't know uh anything about what you're talking about right now, but I do remember I was just trying to prove to them that I was listening and I was present
Yeah.
and that, but I said something to the effect of, "It sounds like you've been carrying something real heavy for a long time." It was almost
Yeah.
exactly what you just said, but
So you were helping them put the brakes on, and I'm sure if the negotiator was there by the time you were saying things like that, negotiator is probably saying, "Wow, is this does this guy had training too?" Because that's what you would want to do. You'd want to validate their feelings, not
mm,
validate the conclusion they're trying to get to, but validate
right.
their feelings.
Yeah, and so
And
labeling those some of those emotions or feelings is a positive because it
it's
reduces
huge.
that threat. You know,
It's
the
huge. Yeah.
yeah, okay. Wow, okay.
Yeah, well, and I sorry I interrupted you,
No,
but I
no,
think when the amygdala starts to slow down, then that means the threat is going away. And
right,
that's when the
right.
person, is probably saying, "Okay, I'll sit down then, but and
Mhm.
listen a little bit longer." Like, I'm not feeling as, as rushed and anxious. I can sit down now maybe. So the brakes, like you said, feathering the brakes a little bit. I like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So accurately reflecting a person's feelings back to them is, creates these physiological changes that help. But there's something else that can backfire that you have to be careful of. And
okay.
that's the idea of urgency. So creating a sense of urgency is not good. So if you were to say, you need to come down now, like you're scaring people, just come down off there and don't do this. Or think of your kids. Those all sound reasonable, right? I mean, that sounds reasonable. Like think of your kids. Okay, so a reasonable person would stop and think about their kids if reason is what got them into that situation. But to the person that's in crisis, their nervous system reads those types of statements and that urgency as danger again. So the
Back
threat
to the threat.
activation system starts to ramp up even more, and it's probably already about at its ceiling, and that can really push somebody into doing something that they shouldn't do.
Yeah, yeah.
So you showed patience. I know you said silence, that you didn't try to fill the silence with noise. That's really calming. It's like, I don't have to say anything. They don't have to say, I can think for a little bit. It's not just like rush where I've got to try to answer. I can't think and there's no space and that urgency is like, ah. So silence, letting them slow things down is really, really helpful.
And listen, to be fair to all parties involved here, on the law enforcement side, I don't know that we're explicitly ever taught, uh, but I'm trying to think of how to explain it, but it feels like on a lot of these calls, it's like, "Let's wrap this up and get on to the next one. We got calls
Hmm.
holding."
Hmm.
You got a, earpiece in your ear where you can hear all the radio calls. There's all this going on, and you're like, "Hey, buddy, I don't have time for this. Let's go." And so sometimes I found myself, and I didn't always do it. I failed sometimes, but I was always fighting this urge to wrap this up. Like, let's go. And
Hmm.
then you got in the
Hmm.
back of your head, I got all these cops here, and they're just standing around, making sure traffic doesn't go. There's just this implicit feeling that I think law enforcement officers have, whether they know it or not, to let's
Wow.
go, let's go, let's go.
Yeah.
And in this case, from what I'm hearing you're saying, in this particular scenario, one of the most dangerous things you can do is speed this thing up,
Yes.
whether you mean to or not, is like,
Yes.
hey, okay. And then, oh man, I'm having all these thoughts. I'm sorry, but
This is
the,
good.
the, but the other one is, I think officers, and it's happened to me sometimes where I've tried everything and nothing's working.
Mhm.
And so whether it's frustration or whatever else, you just go, okay, listen, enough of this, get down, or whatever the
Yeah.
phrase is. And it's extremely dangerous. So
So
we're adding
wow.
to the threat
Yeah,
that they're
you've
feeling.
really opened something up for me to think about. So it's what, like you were saying, some of these thoughts are implicit. Is from your training and from your experience on the job. And so now you have your intuition is saying one thing, like there's an emergency here. That's why I got called out. Every time you're called out, there's an emergency here, but counterintuitively, you need to tell the person there's no emergency here. Like just take your time. And you're told like, I got to get done. I've got to get done with this because there's other calls I got to get to. And then counterintuitively, you have to say to that person, I'm not going anywhere. I can stay here as long as you need me to stay here. Like there's no rush. And then another one is like, I've just got to make sure people comply and follow my orders and do what I do. And
Mhm.
then you're going, I'm not going to force you to do anything. I mean, those are just so opposite
Yeah.
of what you're taught to do because if it's not this type of a crisis and situation, then maybe the intuitive way of doing it is the right way to do it. It just happens to be for this situation, those are the absolute worst things that you could do for a person
Exactly.
in crisis that might end their life.
Yep.
So yeah, that's
Exactly.
that's really interesting how you brought that up. So the counterintuitive part. That's why it has to be trained. That's why there are professionals that train to do this because it's not something you just automatically know. It's not intuitive. It's not something you're born with. It usually goes against those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So nearly every instinct that a person, and this isn't just police officers, nearly every instinct that a caring person has, which is I've got to do something, I've got to fix it, I've got to hurry, I've got to persuade them. Those types of things are wrong in this situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
That's what
interesting.
I'm hearing now. I mean, you should be teaching at the academy on crisis intervention, but,
I
uh
shouldn't, but I bet there are really good instructors there that do teach. But I have one other thing that I think that I've heard people ask that might be helpful here. And people will
okay.
say, I think people worry about this. It's like, how do you even bring it up to somebody? Like if they haven't said, I'm wanting to end my life, but you see they're in such deep despair and you're worried they might. I've heard people say, if I just ask them, like if I ask directly, are you thinking about suicide? That will somehow plant that idea in their mind, or it will make it worse, or it will encourage them to do it, and that is
Oh,
absolutely not true. In
right,
fact,
right.
studies have shown that asking somebody directly if they're thinking about that, doesn't increase the risk. In fact, like a meta-analysis, which means you when you take multiple studies have studied this, a meta-analysis gives kind of the overall answer, and it shows the opposite, that asking doesn't increase the risk, and if anything, there's a reduction, a small reduction, but there's a reduction of suicidal ideation, meaning the thoughts about suicide. So if you bring it up to a person and they hear it, then they're less likely to think about it because you're going, oh yeah, you've named it now, and they're going, yeah, that might not. Where if you don't name it, it's something that can keep kind of percolating in their mind.
Mm.
So I
Hmm.
want people to know that it's okay to talk directly about it as long as you're kind of, not being urgent and trying to solve something. If you're just asking and you're trying to understand them, that's all good. So I just wanted to add that in there.
I think that's an important thing to add. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the curiosity part that you mentioned was also a really good turning point. So that was good. One of the things that I want to talk about your drive home, but I just
Okay.
want to mention this. I don't know if we're getting late on time or not. Probably it seems like we might be, but I just want to mention that.
We
Um,
got time.
okay, there research has shown there's been some researchers looking at suicides, and the idea is if I like how important is it to stretch this out? Like you said that you just took your time and let silence fill the gap. So different researchers have looked at this where they've followed people that have attempted suicide or started to commit suicide and didn't. And they asked them with when they thought about making their suicide attempt, like how long before you attempted it did you think about attempting it? And about half the people or more said it was about 10 minutes after I thought about it, I tried it. So just so you know, it's not always that they've been thinking about it for weeks and months. It's I was just thinking about it, and so I tried it. So stretching out that window a little bit can sometimes help. So that's another reason why you shouldn't rush. And then there's a
Mm.
researcher, it was really interesting, that was looking at, because another thought is, well, if I stop them now, they're just going to try it again later when I'm not
Right.
around, which is what I hear
Yep.
all the time. Research
Yep.
has shown, and this is one specific case where a researcher was looking at people who had uh, been talked down off the Golden Gate Bridge, that in San Francisco,
Mhm.
and he tracked down over 500 of them, and it went back decades. But he found out he looked at them at their cases, and 9 out of 10 of those did not die by suicide. They died by normal causes or other causes. So it wasn't like 90% of them did it anyway. It's 10% of them did. So that just
Mm.
shows. And one of the there was a jumper that survived his jump. I think his name's Kevin Hines, that goes around talking about this. He said that he knew instantly when he jumped that he'd made a mistake. Just like the
Oh,
minute he jumped, he
wow.
thought, "Uh-oh, I made a mistake." So that critical window and taking your time can be really important, kind of stretching that out to give people a moment to say, "Wait, maybe this isn't the right thing to do," to help try
Yeah.
to get to feather the brakes a little bit.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah.
But I think
Thank you.
just if we have a few minutes left,
We do?
you driving home
Mm.
is what was interesting, because you were talking about it as being, I think you said that you felt the tension release and the weight of it, that you
Yep.
started to feel that kind of bearing down on you. There's a term for that in psychology, and it's the kind of the overall term is secondary traumatic stress or vicarious trauma. And it just refers to the toll that repeated exposure to other people's worst moments has on a person. So, first responders like you see people in their worst moments, their worst conditions, and you see that over and over every day for days and weeks and months and years. And it can create similar traumatic scars, even though you didn't experience what they were experiencing. It's not just about the situation you're talking about now, but even like domestic violence or just whatever you're seeing, it just starts to have that effect. And so taking it home with you was not surprising that you would do that. I have a colleague that works with people with vicarious trauma, and it is real. It is real, and it's really difficult to deal with. And I think there needs to be more training around that as well to help officers and first responders.
Yeah. I didn't.
Have you thought about it a lot since?
Well, I mean, I didn't have a language for it, until this podcast. I just know that's what, got us to this season is some calls just stayed with me.
Mhm, mhm.
That's
Yeah,
the way
that
I
and
would
that's
describe it.
so the reason is that stay with you, your memories. It's when you're under stress, adrenaline and cortisol are released into your body, and those are two hormones that help consolidate memories.
Oh,
And so
oh,
research has shown things like if you have two groups of people and you read each group a story, and one is a really emotional story and the other one is more of a neutral story, but it's matched in details and stuff, but just not emotional, that people will remember those intense stories more than the non-intense. But then when they give people a drug that blocks adrenaline receptors, and read them the stories, there's no difference in which story they remember, whether it's the neutral or
mm,
the emotional one. So it's
mm,
having that dump of adrenaline in your system or cortisol that locks everything in, because your brain is saying, this is a serious situation. We need to remember everything about this situation. First of all, to help us avoid getting into it again. But if we do get into it, to know what to do. So it's really important that I remember every detail and I never forget it, which is what's awful about trauma, and that you can't forget it. It's like I want to forget it now, but I can't, because you have a system built to make sure you don't forget it. So when you said that you just felt that release, like that slow release, and I was saying that's adrenaline metabolizing, that's because that's the adrenaline that locked it in to your memory. And I know that in episode 2, the outcome wasn't as good as this, and I'm sure you have, memories of those things as well. So probably some of your most emotional calls are the ones that you think about, at times, I'm guessing. Is that true?
it's fair. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. So,
So
okay, that
yeah.
makes sense to me. Um, what what about it? What do we do? Is there anything we can do?
Yeah, there is. And I think the other problem is a lot of times people that are in the jobs of first responders are there because they're strong and capable and pull themselves up by their bootstraps and those types of things. They're the least likely people to seek help. And vicarious trauma, the way to get through it is to seek help. And so you have a group that's probably less likely than other groups in society to seek help, and they're the ones that need it. So naming the, we talked about naming the emotions and the feelings you have is
Mhm.
good even for first responders to realize, okay, the feeling I'm having right now is this because of this. That's really helpful. It's also really helpful to have peer support, other people in the police force or wherever
Yeah.
that have gone through similar things you can talk about it with, because talking about it is really important. But probably most importantly is professional help. And that's the one that's this kind of the stigma that keeps people from seeking professional help. But
Mm.
that's probably the most important. Yeah.
The stigma thing is real.
It's real, isn't it? Yeah.
I watched a lot of people not get help because getting help would have that means you're admitting that you need it.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. You can't
So,
admit that. You gotta pull
no.
yourself up by your bootstraps.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you just gotta suck it up, like,
Suck it up, yeah.
it's a tough
Buttercup.
job. Yeah, I mean,
No,
so
I know, it's really hard. I've said many times that I couldn't do it, so I'm glad some people do, but it wouldn't be me.
and I'm
But,
thankful for the people who do it. I just want to
me too.
try to, help make
Mhm.
their job a little easier, I guess. It's
Mhm.
not a great way to say it, but I love law enforcement. I'm thankful for everybody, who's trying to do their job the best they can, but
Yep.
if we can offer a little bit of support to them in this way, then feel
Mm,
pretty good about it.
that'd be good,
But
yeah.
yeah,
So, I'm gonna
yeah,
ask you the same question I've been asking you this all the episodes this season.
I've been waiting for it. I've
So, knowing now what you know after our conversation, does that change how you think about this call that you went on?
it does. It specifically it changes how I think about the moment. We already talked about this. The moment I stopped trying to fix it and I
Mhm.
transitioned into just being curious about this person,
Yep.
because at the time it felt like giving up on a strategy. Like I was, but like I had run out of things to try. And then I just ended up just talking. And what you're telling me is that was the strategy,
Mhm.
that this is a thing that had the best chance of working. I just didn't know any of that at the time.
Well, I think you knew it deep down, maybe you didn't put it into words. So, your training, your instincts were there. You also were learning on the job. I like that you weren't so stressed out that you got locked into one way and just kept trying the same thing over and over, that you were cognitively flexible at that point because you realized something wasn't working, as change strategies, which was really good. So you might not have had the framework in mind and known what the names of all the different techniques or what you were doing, but you you might not have known it was a strategy, but it was, and it worked. You had the right response.
I I do think about it a lot that day at that call, and
Mhm.
what I think about is how many people in a similar situation don't have someone who finds the right response. How
Yeah.
many calls go differently, not because of
Mm.
bad intentions,
No.
but just no the the person, the contact officer on the scene just didn't have the right set of tools.
Yeah, that's a really good argument for better training, better resources, um, better programs where mental health professionals can maybe go on calls as ride-alongs with law enforcement, things like that. The research on those types of programs are really strong, but I know the implementation's slow. It's budgets and things.
Too slow.
Yeah, too slow, but I think we're moving in the right direction.
I would agree with that. Progress, not perfection. But
Yeah.
I also want to say something to anyone listening who's been on the other side of this call. I always come at it from the law enforcement side, but
Mhm.
either because you've been that person or because you know someone or love someone who's been that person, What happened in this call? What happened on that structure? The willingness to stay, to listen, to
Mhm.
be present, genuinely present. I think that's what we owe each other. That's the baseline. And if you haven't found that yet from a person or a professional or a line that you call, keep looking because I promise you it exists.
Yeah, that's a good thing to say. Yep.
Well, you're rubbing off on me.
Okay. Next week is episode 7. Sean responds to a call where the person is sober and yet operating in a reality that is not the one the rest of us are in. We're going to talk about drugs, altered states, and the strange internal coherence of someone who is, from the outside, completely off the rails.
Now, this one's going to be a funny one in a way that only makes sense once John explains it to me. But we'll we'll find out that
Thanks for listening, everyone. And remember 988. You can call or text anytime.
anytime. All right, thank you, John.